In the early 1960s, Toronto was a city on the cusp of transformation, often described with a mix of affection and understatement as a rather proper, somewhat sleepy place. Think of it as the kind of town where Sunday shopping was still a radical idea, and the biggest excitement might come from a new department store window display. The Skyline, viewed from the lake or a high vantage point, was dominated by a modest collection of bank towers, hotels, and church steeples, all rendered in sepia tones that made the city feel more like a postcard from the 1950s than a bustling modern metropolis. By mid-decade, however, change was unmistakable. The opening of the new City Hall in 1965, with its curving towers and futuristic design by Finnish architect YORKVILLE, symbolized Toronto's leap into modernity, though not without some grumbling from traditionalists who preferred the old Victorian-style hall across the street. The Toronto Dominion Centre, starting with its sleek black towers in 1967, further reshaped the financial district, announcing that Toronto was no longer content to play second fiddle to Montreal as Canada's business hub. Population-wise, the city was booming. Metro Toronto's numbers swelled from around 1.8 million at the start of the decade to over 2 million by 1971, fueled largely by immigration. Post-war policies had already brought waves of Europeans, Italians, Portuguese, Greeks, and others, who settled in enclaves, building communities with their own shops, churches, and festivals. But the late 1960s saw shifts in immigration rules that opened doors wider to non-Europeans, laying the groundwork for the multicultural mosaic Toronto would become known for, even if full diversity was still emerging. Daily life for many Torontonians revolved around work in factories, offices, or the growing service sector. The cost of living was modest by today's standards. A decent detached house in the suburbs might go for $15,000 to $20,000, about 2 to 3 times an average annual salary, making homeownership achievable for many middle-class families on a single income. Groceries were straightforward. Meat and potatoes featured heavily, though ethnic markets were introducing olives, pasta, and spices to curious shoppers. Eating out often meant a steak at a hotel dining room or fish and chips, as the explosion of international restaurants was still a decade away. Transportation reflected the era's priorities. The Yonge Street subway line, opened in 1954, was extended northward, and the Bloor Danforth line debuted in 1966, with those distinctive red cars rumbling underground. Above ground, streetcars clanged along routes like College or Queen, while the Gardiner Expressway and Don Valley Parkway, completed in the late 1950s and early 1960s, facilitated the suburban sprawl. Cars were everywhere. Big American models with fins giving way to sleeker designs, and traffic was a complaint, though nothing like today's gridlock. Housing mirrored this expansion. The suburbs exploded with bungalows and split levels in places like Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke. But a hallmark of the decade was the rise of high-rise apartment blocks, sprouting up to accommodate the growing population efficiently near transit lines. These concrete towers, often with balconies and modern amenities like indoor pools, represented progress, though some residents joked they all looked the same from the outside. Downtown streets buzzed with a cluttered charm. Neon signs for theaters, diners, and shops jostled for attention on Yonge Street, the city's main artery, where pedestrians dodged streetcars and delivery trucks. Department stores like Eaton's and Simpson's dominated shopping, with elaborate Christmas windows drawing crowds, a tradition that felt magical in an era before malls everywhere. Entertainment had its highlights and quirks. Sports fans reveled in the Toronto Maple Leafs glory days, culminating in the 1967 Stanley Cup win, the last one to date, which some might say cursed the team with eternal hope. Gardens crowds erupted in joy, parading through streets in a celebration that united the city. But the real cultural heartbeat pulsed in Yorkville, a former quiet village turned Bohemian hotspot. What started as coffeehouses in converted Victorian homes evolved into Canada's answer to Greenwich Village. Folk singers strumming guitars, poets reading verses, and young people debating everything from civil rights to free love. Venues like the Riverboat or Purple Onion hosted emerging talents. Gordon Lightfoot honing his storytelling ballads, Joni Mitchell crafting poetic lyrics, Neil Young experimenting with sounds before heading south. By the late 1960s, the scene shifted toward full-blown hippie culture. long hair, beads, protests against the Vietnam War, with American draft dodgers adding to the mix, and experimentation with marijuana or stronger substances. Hippie hepatitis scares and biker elements crept in, leading to police crackdowns and the infamous 1967 sit-in that drew media frenzy. Yorkville's heyday as a counterculture hub faded as rents rose and developers eyed the land, but it left an indelible mark on Canadian music and youth identity. Elsewhere on Yonge Street, a different sound thrived, the Toronto sound of R&B clubs like Le Coq d'Or, where bands backed by Ronnie Hawkins and his Hawks, who became the band, pounded out soulful covers with heavy bass and Hammond organs. It was gritty, danceable music that influenced acts far beyond the city. Socially, Toronto remained conservative. Blue laws kept many activities shuttered on Sundays, and the city's nickname, Toronto the Good, persisted, even as cracks appeared with growing youth rebellion. Racial tensions existed amid increasing diversity, and poverty in older neighborhoods contrasted with suburban prosperity. Yet, there was optimism. Expo 67 in Montreal inspired national pride, and Toronto's own centennial projects, like the O'Keefe Centre, now Meridian Hall, boosted arts. Winters were harsh, as always, skating on Grenadier Pond or harbor rinks, bundling up for hockey games. Summers meant trips to the islands or Sunnyside Beach, before pollution closed some spots. Families picnicked, kids played road hockey, and life moved at a pace that allowed time for neighborhood chats. Economically, the decade was prosperous. Manufacturing jobs were plentiful, unemployment low, and inflation tame. A beer cost pennies, gas was cheap, and movies at local theaters provided affordable escapism, though drive-ins offered a novel twist for dates. By decade's end, Toronto had grown up considerably. Taller buildings, faster transport, louder voices from youth. It wasn't yet the global city of today, but the foundations were laid, somewhat awkwardly, with a touch of humor in the growing pains. Residents might have complained about traffic or rising costs, but many look back with fondness on a time when the city felt smaller, safer, and full of possibility, even if it meant enduring those long, snowy winters without quite so many coffee options. The 1960s in Toronto were a bridge era, from post-war restraint to modern ambition, from buttoned-up propriety to hints of liberation. It was a place where church steeples still competed with new towers, where folk guitars echoed alongside hockey cheers, and where a quiet provincial town began waking up to its potential, occasionally tripping over its own feet in the process, but always moving forward.